Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2 of Best English Patched Visual Novels for the PS Vita. Today we're gonna talk about a few more ones that I didn't mention in my first video. I'd also like to thank everyone for the positive feedback from the first video, it means a lot. As well as Krenagadi and Frog on Motorcycle for being two brave souls requesting a part 2. So here we go. Before we go on, I want to mention that since the last video, 2 visual novels mentioned in the video have received an English patch. Grisaya Side episode, which is a game that tells 3 different short stories in the Grisaya universe. It's a small game that's the last mainline Grisaya series game on the Vita, and now it's possible to play all the mainline series Grisaya games on the Vita in English. And Clannad. Clannad is a very well-known visual novel, and it's one title I don't need to introduce. But I'm gonna do it anyway. Clannad is a visual novel developed by Key, and it's their most famous and well-loved title. The story is primarily set in a high school located in a small Japanese city, and follows the protagonist's interactions with various girls from his school as he helps them deal with their personal problems. I've seen Clannad reported as a visual novel that tugs heavily with your heartstrings and will make you cry. It's also extremely long, with an average playtime of 80 hours on VNDB. I'm personally happy that this big visual novel is now finally playable on the Vita in English, as it was once officially intended.
Boku to nurse no Kenshuu Nishii.
On the first day of his residency at the hospital, the first step to fulfilling his dream of becoming a doctor, the protagonist Takuya meets his childhood friend Mio for the first time in many years. She's now a nurse and shows him around during his busy training days. One day, however, he falls down the stairs while protecting her, resulting in him getting hospitalized. After this, Mio feels responsible and offers to take care of Takuya. After a few steamy incidents, it becomes a small love story between a medical intern and a nurse who would go above her duties to take care of him. As you just heard, this game is a small love story. The setting's pretty generic, as well as the story itself, but since it doesn't try to be unique, it's good enough on its own. The game's length is about 3 to 5 hours, and it can probably be read in one sitting. This game also includes H scenes, which is quite rare on the Vita. Boku to Nurse also has an anime, which is probably why it's somewhat well known, and in the spirit of the VN, it is also a hentai. I'll be honest, I do not really care for otome games. They are a direct opposite to so-called bishoujo games or girl games where you romance girls. Otome games are games where you usually romance handsome men, and it's something that's usually directed more towards women. But that is not to say that they are only man romancing games for women. There's many of them where the story takes the central part. For example, there's Code Realize, Guardian of Rebirth from the Code Realize series, which was officially released in English for the Vita. I've heard that the story is good and that the romance part comes in later in the end of the game, which did leave me a bit interested. And I wanted to include some otome game English patches in this video, even if I'm not particularly interested in them, because at the end of the day, they are fan patches that have had a lot of love and effort put into them. So next up we have Hakuouki SSL, Sweet School Life. The plot of the game is the following. Spring, a season of blessing for new encounters. Yukimura Chizuru knocks on the gates of a private academy, which has since been a boys' school. However, as of this year, Hakuou Academy opens its gates to co-education, and Chizuru is the only female student enrolled, thus begins her first year. This game is a spin-off game of Hakuouki Shinsengumi Kitan, also known as Hakuouki Strange Tales of the Shinsengumi in the West, which is an otome game that takes place over 150 years ago in the Bakumatsu period. But Hakuouki SSL takes place in the modern era, evident by the characters using mobile phones in the game. And for what it is, I think it looks like a pretty decent VN, with some interesting looking characters and a nice English fan translation that was made by Otogelib. Looking at the footage, this definitely looks like a game for the female audience, but it's a great effort nonetheless by the fan translators. Buried Stars. Buried Stars has a quite interesting backstory. First off, the game was made in Korea, not in Japan, as we'll come to expect. And what is this Korean exclusive game about? Well, during a live broadcast of a survival audition competition, the stage collapses, trapping the contestants and the staff. They have a few hours until a rescue team arrives, and they must wait until then. Their sponsored smartwatches are the only way to know what's going on in the outside world. But then, an anonymous user on SNS forewarns of murder, saying that they must pay for their crimes, and the survivors become further divided as their predicament worsens. Will they be able to survive until their rescue team arrives? Who is the unknown killer, and why are they doing this? From the description, it sounds intriguing. A game of mystery and suspense. But I haven't played it myself, so I cannot comment any further. I will say that I find the Korean art somewhat refreshing compared to the usual Japanese visual novels. But what I find most interesting about this VN is the way it received an English patch. This game originally came out for the PS4 and Switch worldwide, but the Vita version came out only in Korea. Maybe people were already thinking of creating an English patch for it, but it turns out it was a lot simpler. Only a few months later, a fan discovered that the Korean Vita version actually had all assets from the worldwide release inside of it already. And this meant that if it was somehow possible to enable the usage of those assets, the game could be played in languages other than Korean. In other words, the English language was already in the game files, it just had to be enabled somehow to show up in game. And that is done by modifying your save file. For instructions how to do it, I leave a link in the description below. As to why this is possible, it seems the assets were just left in by the developers from the worldwide release. Maybe they thought of doing a worldwide release for the Vita too, or maybe it was just easier to port the game with all assets included. But in the end, they were just never used, as the game was only released in Korea. I personally think it's really interesting that something like this happened, because I've never seen that happen before. If My Heart Had Wings. This is a well-known game in the visual novel scene, and for a good reason. It's one of the most well-loved moege visual novels out there. At least that's the impression I get. And thankfully, it also has an English translation patch for the Vita. If My Heart Had Wings is a story presenting a lovely and bittersweet tale of youth. It is a romantic comedy where you take on the role of Aoi Minase, as he meets various young girls in his hometown and works together with them to revive their school's glider flying soaring club. They resurrect the soaring club in order to fulfill a childhood dream, to fly on a glider. Sounds pretty wholesome to me. Much of the story centers around the main heroine of the story, Kotori, who is dealing with and striving to overcome her disability, while at the same time looking at the psychological effect on a teenage girl of losing the ability to walk. The player character, Aoi, also has a physical disability, a messed up knee which prevents him from pursuing his passion, cycling. It is through his understanding of their respective losses that he is able to get her to open up a little by little. There is one caveat with this patch, and it's that its translation is considered quite bad, like a lot of mistranslations. So admittedly, you might get a better experience playing it on PC with a retranslation patch. However, I still think the Vita version is worth reading if you like the Vita. Just bear in mind the translation is not very good. I'm of the opinion, however, that as long as I can read the game and understand it in English, even if some nuance is lost, which of course sucks, it's okay as long as I can understand the bigger picture and see and understand what's trying to be said. Next up, we have Ninki Seiyuu, How to Make a Pop Voice Actress. It is a game set in the voice acting industry from the point of view of voice actresses, managers, and sound engineers. It is a well-grounded rom-com drama that follows young voice actresses as they passionately work towards their dreams, while also being an insightful look into the voice acting industry and its characters' internal struggles. It's not a very long game, around 15 hours or so, and only has 3 different character routes, one of them being the protagonist's sister. Yeah, that's kinda weird. However, this patch doesn't feature any explicit content, so it's okay. But other than that, the characters are all pretty and the soundtrack feels fresh. It is a solid visual novel to have on the Vita in English. For last, we have something very interesting. Plastic Memories, or PlaMemo for short. Now this is an interesting game. It is one of the few anime games that has gotten an English patch on the Vita. And it's not just an English patch, it's a full English fan translation brought to us by Ayla Execution Squad. So firstly, what is PlaMemo? It's a game that takes place in the near future, in which humans live alongside androids that look exactly like humans and have human emotion and memory. Cyan Artificial Intelligence Corporation, or SAI Corp in short, is responsible for the creation of Giftias, highly advanced androids which are almost indiscernible from normal humans. However, unlike humans, Giftias have a maximum lifespan of 81,920 hours, or around 9 years and 4 months. The protagonist, Tsukasa Mizugaki, who works at SAI, is responsible for collecting Giftias that have met their expiration date before they lose their memories and become hostile. He is partnered with a beautiful Giftia named Ayla. Ayla is a veteran and considered the best in Giftia retrievals, contrary to her petite figure and placid nature. Time is fleeting though, and Tsukasa must come to terms with his feelings for Ayla before her time is up. PlaMemo is a mixed media project that has an anime, a light novel, and a visual novel. The visual novel doesn't just take the anime's plot, but it heavily expands on it from the protagonist Tsukasa's point of view. Besides the anime's ending, the game also features 2 original endings and 4 character endings. It's the most complete version of the story. Usually, when a VN is made based off of an anime, it is a spin-off of sorts, but in this case, the VN can be considered a full-on replacement for the story. This game was written by Hayashi Naotaka, who's been the lead writer in the Science Adventure series, who wrote the scenario for Steins Gate, recently released Anonymous Code, and even co-wrote one route in Remember 11, The Age of Infinity. I've seen a fan call PlaMemo Hayashi's baby, as it can be seen by him writing every piece of narrative material for it. If this sounded intriguing, but you don't have a Vita to play it, you can also play this game on the PC through an unofficial port. I leave more info in the description. If you saw my last video, I mentioned VNDS there, but I completely forgot to mention this game, Kanon. Now this VN port is cool because the guy who made it specifically for the Vita. Kanon was the first game made by Key, the developers of the aforementioned Clannad. It's a game in a similar style, but it's not as refined as Clannad, given it was their first game. Regardless, it has an important status in the VN world, and thanks to this port, it can be played on the Vita. And finally, I'll mention a few more VNs I'd like to see on the Vita in English. Occultic 9. This is the last science adventure game that was released on the Vita. It was first a light novel series, which got officially translated, by the way, was then given an anime adaptation, and finally a visual novel, which never received an English translation. However, it is not like Plastic Memories, where the VN can be considered a replacement, because the Occultic 9's visual novel is considered bad for many reasons. Firstly, it ditches multiple viewpoints, which was something the original story had, replacing it with only one viewpoint. Secondly, it has an abrupt ending. Both the anime and the visual novel use the light novels as the source material. However, since the light novels were never finished, even in Japan, the ending that was added to the anime is the only ending we have. And that same ending was used for the visual novel, as far as I know. And thirdly, the visual novel adds little new content since it's almost directly based on the light novels and the anime, so if you've gone through those, there should be nothing new there. The game's creators did promise to add a supplementary patch to it, which would add more to the ending as well as other improvements, but that is yet to be seen after many years. But regardless of all that, I would still like to see this visual novel translated one day, even if it's not very good. Raging Loop. Raging Loop is a thriller, psychological horror visual novel game set in a remote Japanese village. In this game, the protagonist is trapped in a haunting time loop, plagued by a series of gruesome murders. He retains his memories across iterations, allowing him to make different choices. Players must uncover secrets, solve puzzles, and alter events to break the cycle and find the truth. The game does actually have a Chinese language patch for the Vita, but not an English one. Memories of Yubikiri no Kioku is part of the Memories of series, known for its focus on emotional storytelling and character development. It's also a romantic love triangle between the protagonist and two girls, Chinatsu and Kasumi, as seen on the cover. The game's soundtrack was made by composer Takeshi Abo, whose works I really enjoy, and I've even used this game's soundtrack in this very video. That's one of the reasons why I'd love to see this game playable in English. And that's it for part 2. If you like this video, give it a like, smash the subscribe button, and let me know if you want to see a part 3 to this. Until next time.